A few months ago, the wooden legs of my chair scraped across the ballroom floor. A second later, there was nothing beneath me. I fell hard on my back. The impact knocked the wind right out of me. My hip slammed against the cold marble, and my elbow hit the ground so hard that my fingers instantly went numb. A water glass shattered into pieces, sending water and sharp shards spilling all over my hands. The clinking of silverware stopped, and the string quartet abruptly halted their music. All 200 guests fell dead silent. Brooke stood towering over me, still gripping the back of the chair she had just yanked away. "You don't belong at the family table," she said with a scornful smirk. Beside her, my father, sitting in his wheelchair, struck the metal armrest with his good hand. 3 sharp, distinct taps. Right then, the groom, Evan, pushed his own chair back and stood up. Under the crystal chandeliers, his face was pale, his jaw completely clenched. "That is enough," he said to his new wife. "Do you really want me to tell everyone the truth?" Brooke froze. The truth Evan was threatening to expose was no surprise to me. It was the end of a long trail of clues I had started following 6 weeks before this wedding. The waiting room at the speech therapy center smelled of bleach and stale coffee. I crouched down to adjust the footrest on my father's wheelchair, making sure his right leg was properly supported. I checked his water bottle and counted the pills in his daily organizer. Brooke walked through the glass double doors. She was 20 minutes late. She arrived smelling of sweet vanilla perfume, holding a giant iced coffee from a chain drive-thru. She walked up to our father, snapped a selfie with him on her phone, gave him a quick peck on the cheek, and announced, "I have to run. I have my final dress fitting." Our mother patted her arm affectionately. "Go on, honey." As the glass doors swung shut, my mother turned to me. "You should really try to be happy for her, Rachel. She is finally getting her special day." I did not argue. I just pushed my father's wheelchair into the therapist's office. That evening, my father's care log was spread wide open on my kitchen table. At 39, I was the director of operations for a major hospital system in Chicago, which meant I knew exactly how to read medical billing codes. While reviewing a bank statement, something caught my eye. A reimbursement check for bathroom accessibility equipment had been issued directly under my sister's name. It made absolutely no sense. Next to the statement was the original invoice from the contractor. Medicare had covered 80% of the remodel, and I had personally paid the down payment out of my own checking account. Brooke had not contributed a single dime. Further down the page, there was another charge for $4,000 with an unrecognizable merchant code. The description made it look like a standard healthcare expense, but the numbers did not add up. I did not call Brooke. Instead, I took photos of the bank statement, printed an extra copy, and filed everything into a heavy binder. The next day, I drove out to my parents' house in the suburbs. I dropped the contractor's invoice on the living room coffee table and asked Brooke why she had received a reimbursement for an expense I had paid. Then, I pointed out the mysterious $4,000 charge. Brooke crossed her arms, blocking the television screen. "Dad knows I am just organizing things." He agreed to it. My mother did not even bat an eye. She claimed that, as always, I was just trying to control the family. I did not argue with either of them. I looked over at my father, who was sitting in his wheelchair by the bay window. He raised his left hand and struck the wooden side table. 1, 2, 3 hard taps. In his therapy sessions, 3 taps meant no. I jotted down the date, the time, and Brooke's exact words before walking out the front door. The drive back to my apartment took about 20 minutes. It was a small, 1-bedroom place in the city that I had been renting for 3 months, paying for it entirely with my own salary. Inside, everything was quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the distant noise of city traffic. On my dining table sat an offer letter to return to work full-time as an operations manager, resting right next to my thick evidence binder. I opened the binder. It had 5 sections divided by colored tabs. I filed the bathroom remodel invoice under the medical section. I wrote the date and time on a yellow sticky note and pressed it onto the plastic sleeve. I had no intention of arguing with my mother or having a screaming match with my sister. The glow of my laptop lit up the room as I searched for an old financial document. Before suffering his massive stroke, my father had authorized me to keep all his financial records. I needed to know exactly who owned the merchant code for that mysterious $4,000 charge. I typed the numbers into a search engine. The county business database loaded, and when the results popped up, the air left my lungs. That code did not belong to a medical supplier, a contractor, or a pharmacy. It belonged to the Grand Oak Hotel. That luxury downtown hotel had never provided any medical care to my father. They had simply charged his account. I opened my email and drafted a short message to Brooke. I asked her to provide the original receipts for 3 specific withdrawals made from the account designated for our father's care. I kept my tone strictly professional. I did not accuse her of anything, nor did I mention the hotel. I clicked send, closed my laptop, and waited. Brooke did not reply in writing. 3 minutes later, my cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. "Why are you suddenly auditing me?" she snapped the second I answered. Her voice was strained and incredibly defensive. "I am just getting Dad's finances in order." "It is what he wanted me to do," I replied. In the background, I could hear my mother yelling that I needed to stop trying to run the family. I firmly told Brooke to send her explanation and the receipts to my email. Then I hung up. The real retaliation came the next morning. My phone chimed with a notification from the family group chat. Brooke had written a massive paragraph directed at our parents and our 2 aunts. She accused me of reimbursing myself for years while pretending to be the self-sacrificing daughter taking care of Dad. To prove her point, she uploaded a cropped screenshot of a bank transfer. It only showed a massive withdrawal, which was exactly the amount I had fronted 6 months earlier to build the wheelchair ramp at their house. She had deliberately cropped out the memo line that stated the purpose of the payment, making it look like pure theft. My mother replied instantly. She demanded that I return the stolen money and apologize before the situation escalated. I clenched my jaw, but I did not type out a defense. I went into my digital files, found the itemized invoice from the medical equipment company, and pulled the complete bank statement showing my father's signature authorizing the reimbursement. I uploaded both documents to the chat and hit send without adding a single word. The group chat went dead silent. No one apologized. No one corrected the lie. That was when I realized Brooke was not just hiding money. She was actively building a narrative to make everyone believe I was the villain. The next red flag appeared on Wednesday afternoon. I drove to my parents' house to drop off a new prescription. It was sweltering hot, and a lawnmower was humming down the street. I walked up the porch steps, punched my code into the electronic smart lock, and waited for the familiar click. The light blinked red. I wiped the sweat from my thumb and tried again. Much slower. Another beep, another red light. I pulled out my phone, assuming the system was rebooting, but an error message popped up. My account no longer had access to the family profile. Brooke had revoked all my administrative permissions. A text from her arrived right at that moment. It said she needed to protect our father from financial pressure. Then she claimed the family had decided it was best if I stopped coming by the house. I did not pound on the door or yell for my mother to let me in. I took screenshots of the lock error and her text message, saving them to a secure cloud folder. Then I dialed the landline connected to the accessibility device in my father's bedroom. He answered on the second ring. Keeping my voice completely level, I told him a scheduling conflict had come up, but I would see him at his next therapy session later that week. My father tapped the phone receiver twice, his way of letting me know he understood. That night, my apartment felt different. It smelled faintly of pine cleaner, but every single corner belonged to me. There were no family arguments and no locked doors. A large cardboard box was waiting for me in the hallway. I dragged it into the dining room, pulled out the pieces of a used dining table, and spent nearly an hour assembling it, tightening every bolt with an Allen wrench. Once it was sturdy, I placed a very important letter right in the center. Months ago, the hospital had offered me a full-time promotion as the operations manager, but I had delayed accepting it so I could manage my father's care. I grabbed a blue pen, signed the offer letter, and emailed my acceptance. Then I spent 2 hours bulletproofing my future. I set up auto-pay for my rent, placed a hard freeze on my credit reports, and transferred my emergency fund to a local credit union on the other side of the city. After that, I opened a yellow legal pad and began sketching out a business plan. I wanted to offer consulting services to families navigating the complex recovery of stroke patients. I was building my own fortress, and no one in my family had any idea. The following Tuesday, I walked into a brick building in the Loop carrying my heavy binder of evidence. Sarah Jenkins ran a boutique law firm specializing in elder law on the 3rd floor. The waiting room smelled of rich leather and fresh stationery. Sarah sat behind a massive oak desk. She wore a sharp navy blue suit and radiated a calm authority that instantly put me at ease. She opened my binder and began reviewing each section meticulously. The only sound in the room was the crisp turning of pages. When she finished looking over the timeline, she looked up and folded her hands. Is your goal to take control of your family's accounts? Or simply to protect your father? Protect him, I answered without hesitation. I want a neutral professional to manage his money. I made it crystal clear that I did not want access to my father's retirement funds, because doing so would only validate the narrative my sister was trying to sell. Sarah nodded slowly, her expression full of respect. A power of attorney allows a person to act on behalf of someone else, she explained, but it does not give them a blank check to do whatever they want with the money. She logged into the county database, downloaded a copy of the legal document, printed it, and slid it across the desk to me. The text was undeniable. My father had only authorized payments related to medical expenses, daily living needs, and necessary home modifications. Nowhere did it grant permission to gift money or cover personal expenses. Furthermore, it legally bound the agent to keep comprehensive and accurate records of every single transaction. Brooke had failed to provide those records when I officially requested them. On top of that, she had used a completely legal reimbursement to frame me as a thief. That alone was a massive breach of fiduciary duty. Sarah turned back to the financial section of my binder. She pulled out the bank statement showing the mysterious hotel charge and placed it right next to the original invoice for the bathroom remodel. She clicked a red pen. First, she circled the deposit amount on the medical contractor's invoice. Then, she circled the charge for the Grand Oak Hotel ballroom deposit. The two figures were identical, down to the exact penny. Sarah cleared a wide space on her oak desk, pushing her own files aside to spread out my entire binder. Over the next 2 hours, we mapped out bank statements and medical bills, organizing every transaction month by month. Slowly, an undeniable pattern emerged. It had all started 14 months ago with tiny withdrawals. At first, they were negligible expenses. A trip to the grocery store, a tank of gas, small errands. Each receipt on its own could easily be dismissed as a careless mistake or a purchase made to help my father. But 8 months ago, right around the time my sister flaunted her diamond engagement ring on social media, the amounts skyrocketed. Brooke had tested the waters with small theft. When no one stopped her, the floodgates opened. The lawyer did not waste time making grand speeches. Sarah immediately drafted legal preservation notices and fired them off to the bank, the luxury hotel, and every business listed in the fraudulent ledger. Those letters were not demanding documents right away. Their sole purpose was to legally prevent anyone from deleting or altering the payment histories. I signed the official intake form for Adult Protective Services, detailing my suspicions based purely on the paper trail, careful not to make claims I could not yet prove. Less than an hour later, a fraud investigator at the bank opened a preliminary inquiry and requested the contact information for the primary account holder. Right then, a notification pinged on Sarah's computer. She opened the email, read the message, and turned the monitor toward me. The wedding planner had replied to the preservation notice to prove she was cooperating. She attached an email thread. Staring right at me was a directive sent directly from Brooke's personal email account. Brooke had instructed the planner to use generic, vague descriptions on all future invoices for the ballroom deposits. There was no room for doubt anymore. Brooke was not confused or disorganized. She was actively and deliberately laundering our father's money. On Thursday afternoon, I walked into the rehabilitation wing of my hospital. But this time, I was there as a guest. Maya, the speech therapist managing my father's case, had asked me to attend his weekly session. Walking into that quiet clinic felt like crossing a heavily guarded border. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I did not have to hide from my mother or bypass a smart lock just to see my own father. He was sitting by a large window. His right arm rested on the padded tray of his wheelchair. In front of him sat a digital communication tablet, and next to it was a laminated board with the words yes and no. Maya sat across from him, speaking in a calm, highly respectful tone. First, she ran through simple cognitive tests to check his memory. She asked him what month it was, what his home address was, and his date of birth. My father answered every question flawlessly. Using his functional fingers, he dragged a specialized stylus across the screen, selecting the correct answers without a second of hesitation. His mind was razor sharp. The only issue was that the stroke had damaged his ability to speak normally. Then, Maya shifted the conversation to family. She mentioned my mother, and then she brought up Brooke's upcoming wedding. The second he heard my sister's name, my father dropped the stylus. He raised his left hand, the only one he fully controlled, and slammed it down on the plastic tray. 3 loud, clear taps. I stepped forward so I was right in his line of sight. I needed to ask him a question that left absolutely no gray area. Do you want me to hire an independent attorney to represent your interests and yours alone? My father did not hesitate. He firmly pointed to the word yes on the laminated board. Then he turned back to the tablet, opened the custom phrase Bank Maya had built for him, and selected 2 words. The electronic voice broke the silence. Private meeting. I stared at the screen. In that single moment, everything clicked into place. For over a year, my mother and Brooke had treated this incredibly intelligent man like a piece of furniture. They spoke for him and treated his silence as blanket consent for whatever they wanted to do. I had fallen into the exact same trap. I thought my father needed someone to fight for him and bring him justice. But the truth was much simpler. My father did not need a savior. He just needed a safe way to express exactly what he wanted. Maya closed her notebook. She looked at me with deep, professional concern. Your dad has been trying to tell us the exact same name for 3 weeks, she said. 2 weeks before the wedding, a medical transport van pulled up to the rehab center. Tuesday afternoons were always my father's speech therapy slot. It was a fixed appointment that no one ever questioned. Brooke was miles away in the city, attending her final dress fitting. My mother was back at the suburban house, completely convinced my father was just doing vocal and swallowing exercises. But today was different. Sarah Jenkins and a geriatric psychiatrist were already waiting in a private conference room. I met my father at the glass entrance, wheeled him down the hallway, and then stepped completely out of the way. If I truly wanted to respect his autonomy, I had to let him face the evaluation alone. I waited in the lobby for almost an hour, listening to the hum of the air conditioning and the ding of the elevator. Finally, the heavy wooden door swung open. The psychiatrist stepped out and invited me in. My father was sitting at the head of a long boardroom table. He looked exhausted, but fierce. To his right sat a notary public, organizing a thick stack of official documents. Sarah spoke to him with immense respect, asking him to confirm if he understood the financial ledgers laid out on the table. My father began typing on his tablet. The electronic voice stated clearly that he had never authorized paying for a luxury ballroom, buying a designer wedding dress, or paying off personal credit card debt. His only wish was for his medical bills to be managed properly. Then he typed something else. He recalled a text message where Brooke had urgently asked him for a security code that had been texted to his phone. She had told him it was a verification step required to pay the contractors building his wheelchair ramp. My stomach tied itself into a knot. That security code was not used to pay for the ramp. It was the 2-factor authentication code Brooke needed to add herself as an authorized beneficiary on my father's primary checking account, bypassing the bank's fraud prevention measures. The notary placed a legal document in front of my father. It was the official revocation of the power of attorney. My father picked up a black pen. His right hand shook slightly, but he signed his name with absolute conviction. Sarah organized the copies immediately and prepared the legal notifications for the bank and for Brooke. My sister was about to receive a demand letter requiring a forensic accounting of every single dollar that had vanished. Afterward, Sarah closed her briefcase and explained that someone needed to manage his estate while the accounts remained frozen and under audit. I shook my head before she even finished the sentence. If I took control of the money, it would just give Brooke the exact narrative she wanted to sell, that I was a jealous sister trying to steal the inheritance. I made it very clear that I would continue arranging his medical transport and overseeing his daily care, but I refused to touch his bank accounts. My father used his tablet and selected the name of an independent financial fiduciary from a vetted list Sarah had provided. He did not want me fighting over his money, and I did not want to fight over it either. That single decision drew a massive, uncrossable line between us and the woman who was currently staring at herself in a white dress. My family's reaction came that very night. I was standing in my kitchen slicing an apple when I listened to a voicemail from my mother. She did not even bother asking how therapy went or how my father was doing. She immediately started screaming, accusing me of humiliating my sister right before the most important day of her life. Apparently, the law firm had couriered the revocation of the power of attorney just an hour earlier. My mother demanded I call the lawyer instantly and cancel everything. According to her, Brooke had always planned to pay the money back once she received her portion of the inheritance. I stopped slicing the apple. Without realizing it, my mother had just admitted on a recorded voicemail that she knew all about the missing money. She and Brooke were already dividing up the estate of a man who was very much alive, using his retirement funds to pay for floral arrangements and a wedding venue. I saved the audio file to my secure folder and threw the apple in the trash. 4 days before the wedding, I got a call from the bank's fraud department. I sat down at my table and opened my binder. The investigator spoke in a strictly professional tone. He confirmed they had received the revoked power of attorney and the medical evaluation proving my father's cognitive capacity. The accounts were now completely frozen pending a full forensic audit. Then he gave me a crucial piece of information. 3 weeks earlier, Brooke had scheduled an automated wire transfer of $28,400 to the Grand Oak Hotel. The payment was timed to clear right before the venue's final deposit deadline. On the hotel's end, the system showed the payment as processing, which was why they kept the wedding date secured. But the account freeze had hard stopped the wire before the funds ever left the bank. If our investigation confirms what we suspect, the hotel is going to find out very soon that the money never actually arrived, the investigator explained. The second the call ended, my phone buzzed again. It was Brooke, I answered, but I did not say a word. She started off using a sickeningly sweet voice, even calling me by a childhood nickname she had not used in a decade. She asked how I was doing, and said she really wanted us to sit down and talk like a family. When I maintained my silence, her tone flipped entirely. In a low, desperate voice, she demanded I call the fraud department and withdraw my complaint. Then she begged me to sign a statement, claiming our father had gifted her the money as an early inheritance. I gripped the phone tightly, took a deep breath, and kept my composure. I told the furious bride that she no longer had any legal authority over my father's accounts. I also made it crystal clear that from this moment forward, all communication had to go directly through my attorney. Then I hung up. Sarah Jenkins did not waste time making phone calls. The very next morning, she sent a formal proposal via certified mail and email. The terms were non-negotiable. Brooke had to provide a complete accounting of every missing dollar, return the stolen funds immediately, and stop blocking my father from receiving visitors. The deadline was Friday afternoon, right before the wedding rehearsal dinner. We did not ask to cancel the wedding or demand the hotel shut down the event. We were simply giving her one final legal off-ramp to fix what she had done. Brooke completely ignored the letter. She just texted me, calling me a bitter, single woman who wanted to ruin her happiness out of pure jealousy. My mother tried a different tactic. The next day, she called my alternate number. She told me I was allowed to attend the wedding only because the photographer needed a full family portrait, and my father was refusing to put on his tuxedo unless I was there. She warned me not to cause a scene and added that my assigned seat would be at a tiny table all the way in the back, right by the kitchen doors. I was just about to decline the invitation when I received a photo from Aunt Nancy. The picture showed my father in his wheelchair, pointing a finger at his communication tablet. The screen displayed one simple sentence: "Please come sit with me." A few seconds later, Aunt Nancy texted me, promising she would stay glued to my father's side the entire night and would not let anyone take his tablet away. That single photo completely changed my mind. I was not going to hide in my apartment while my family showed off a wedding funded by stolen money, and I was absolutely not going to abandon my father when he had specifically asked me to be there. Friday night, I did nothing out of the ordinary. I went to my lawyer's office and locked the original evidence binder inside a heavy metal filing cabinet. I only took a folder of copies back to my apartment. I also booked my own black car service so I could leave the venue whenever I wanted. I did not buy a gift, and I certainly did not contribute to the honeymoon fund. Before turning off the lights, I dropped the blue key to my apartment into my clutch purse. That little piece of metal gave me peace of mind. It reminded me that I had a safe, secure place to return to, far away from my family's toxicity. The next morning, while I was getting ready, my phone rang on the bathroom vanity. It was Evan, the groom. His voice was incredibly tense, completely stripped of the arrogant confidence he usually brought to family dinners. He asked me why my father's name was flagged on a payment issue email sent by the venue coordinator. As I put in an earring, I replied, "You should probably ask your bride where that money came from." A heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. Evan begged me not to ruin the wedding over a petty family squabble. He insisted that whatever misunderstanding was happening with the money could wait one more day. In that moment, I realized something vital. He already suspected there was massive financial fraud happening, but he desperately wanted to remain ignorant. He just wanted the illusion of a perfect luxury wedding to survive the weekend, and he expected me to play along. "Check the vendor portal," I told him, and then I hung up. I walked out of my building and waited for my ride. The morning air was crisp and clear. Just as the black SUV pulled up to the curb, my phone lit up again. It was a text from Evan. He had sent a screenshot of the hotel's billing system. Since his name was on the contract, he had full access to the payment ledger. The image showed a massive outstanding balance, a bounced wire transfer, and my father's name listed as the original account holder. The early deposits had cleared, and Evan had even put his own credit card on file to hold the reservation. But the final $28,000 payment had been outright rejected due to the frozen account. A second message popped up beneath the photo. Evan asked one single question, and he sounded frantic. He wanted to know if the legal freeze with the bank was real. As I slid into the back seat of the SUV, I typed my reply. I confirmed that it was absolutely real, and I explained that his fiancée had known for 6 weeks that the funds were stolen. The typing bubble appeared on my screen for a long time. Finally, he sent one last text. With those words, I knew the entire house of cards was about to collapse. Brooke says your dad gifted us the money, but the hotel says the payment is flagged as fraudulent. Walking into the Grand Oak Hotel felt like stepping into an active crime scene. The ballroom smelled intensely of white roses and vanilla candles. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting pure luxury from every angle. As I walked down the hall, I could not stop thinking that every centerpiece, every draped table, and every premium detail represented medical therapies my father would never receive. Relatives averted their eyes when they saw me, sipping their champagne and aggressively avoiding eye contact. I kept my head high and walked straight toward the main reception area. Near the head table, Brooke was posing for the videographer, playing the role of the perfect, glowing bride. Her white designer gown sparkled under the spotlights. She leaned down to hug my father and flash a brilliant smile for the camera, but at the exact same time, she subtly shoved his communication tablet out of frame so it would not ruin the shot. My mother intercepted me halfway across the room. She clamped her hand around my wrist like a vice and hissed at me not to say a single word about the money. She demanded I let the family enjoy the wedding. A few yards away, Evan did not look like a happy groom. He was standing near the bandstand, obsessively refreshing the screen of his cell phone. His jaw was locked tight as he stared at the hotel portal. The venue was still operating because his personal credit card was on file as collateral, but the massive rejected payment was glaring in red text. When our eyes met, he gave me a subtle nod, signaling me to follow him to a quiet corner near the coat check. The second we were alone, he demanded definitive proof that my father had never authorized the final venue payment. I kept a firm distance from Evan. I told him that explaining a psychiatric evaluation and a revoked power of attorney in a crowded hallway was pointless. I just gave him one piece of advice. Ask the account holder directly, in front of an impartial witness. Evan rubbed his temples and closed his eyes. He confessed that Brooke had sworn up and down that the cash was a generous wedding gift from my father. I did not flinch. Then she should have absolutely no problem letting him confirm that for you himself. I walked back into the main ballroom and checked the seating chart by the bar. Brooke had exiled me to a tiny table in the very back, jammed right up against the swinging kitchen doors. You could smell the industrial dish soap over the expensive floral arrangements. I started walking toward my assigned seat. Across the massive room, my father tracked my every move. Suddenly, he slammed his good hand against the armrest of his wheelchair. Smack, smack, smack. The 3 strikes cut sharply through the background music. Aunt Nancy immediately read his communication board. She looked right at me and aggressively waved me over to the head table. At that exact moment, a venue coordinator appeared carrying a wooden chair with a white cushion. She placed it directly next to my father's wheelchair at the center of the head table. Brooke saw the entire thing before I even reached the steps. She stormed toward me, the heavy silk of her dress dragging across the polished stone floor. She got so close I could feel the heat radiating off her. With a voice dripping in venom, she ordered me to go back to the kitchen table where I belonged. I did not budge. I stood right next to the empty chair and replied calmly, I am going to sit exactly where the guest of honor wants me to sit. Her face turned violently red. She raised her voice so every guest at the surrounding tables could hear her. She accused me of trying to steal the spotlight to distract everyone from the fact that I was a thief. I did not yell back. I simply looked down at my father, who was sitting right between us. Dad can answer for himself. I smoothed my dress and began to sit down. That was when a pair of hands grabbed the back of the chair. Brooke yanked it backward with all her strength. The wooden legs screeched across the glossy floor, and I fell backward into dead air. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My hip cracked against the cold marble, and my elbow hit so hard my fingers instantly went numb. The water glass shattered, sending freezing water and jagged glass cascading over my hand. The string quartet stopped playing instantly. All 200 guests fell dead silent. Half the room already had their phones out to record the dinner speeches, which meant they caught the entire assault on camera. Brooke stood towering over me, delivering the line she had clearly rehearsed. "You don't belong at the family table." Beside her, my father began striking his armrest with terrifying force. 3 strikes, a brief pause, and 3 more strikes. It was an unmistakable, undeniable rejection. Evan shoved his own chair back so violently it tipped over onto the floor. He stood up immediately. Under the crystal chandeliers, his face was completely drained of color. Before Brooke could take another step toward me, he held up his hand. "That is enough," his voice echoed across the silent ballroom. He stared a hole straight through her. "Do you really want me to tell everyone the truth?" Brooke froze. Every ounce of arrogant confidence evaporated. In its place was pure panic. She knew Evan had checked the hotel system. She knew he had seen the notification, proving the stolen money had been blocked. Right then, an electronic chime pierced the heavy silence. My father slowly raised his left arm and reached for his communication tablet. Brooke did not even look at her husband. She lunged forward to rip the device away from him, but a venue security guard in a dark suit materialized out of nowhere and stepped between them before she could touch the screen. Aunt Nancy picked up the tablet and placed it safely on my father's lap. My right hand was burning from the glass cuts. A banquet server knelt down next to me and pressed a thick cloth napkin into my palm to stop the bleeding. I did not try to stand up. I stayed on the floor, watching my father. Evan completely ignored his frantic wife. He walked straight up to the wheelchair and asked in a chillingly calm voice, "Sir, did you authorize the payment for this wedding?" My father raised his left hand and struck the armrest. 1, 2, 3. The strikes echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Then he took his stylus and pressed the screen. The electronic voice spoke. "No." Brooke's flawlessly contoured face distorted in sheer panic. She pointed a shaking finger at me and started screaming. She shrieked that I had trained a brain-damaged man like a circus animal. She claimed the speech therapist and I had been manipulating him for months just to ruin her perfect day. I reached into my clutch with my good hand and pulled out 2 folded documents. I handed them straight to Evan. The first was the signed result of the independent psychiatric evaluation, confirming my father was in full possession of his mental faculties. The second was the officially notarized revocation of Brooke's power of attorney. There was no need to read his full medical history in front of 200 people. Those papers were the ultimate trump card. Standing right next to the wheelchair, Aunt Nancy lifted her chin and spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. She announced that she had read the clinical reports herself, and her brother completely understood everything happening around him. My father did not even glance at the screaming woman in the white dress. He stayed entirely focused on his screen. Calmly, he selected another phrase. The digital voice chimed again. "I understand." He paused, navigating to his custom keyboard. Finally, the tablet spoke one last time. Brooke used my money. I was still sitting on the floor, applying pressure to my bleeding hand. I had never even touched the tablet. It was undeniable proof that Brooke's claim about me manipulating him was a complete fabrication. Evan stared at the legal documents in his hands, then slowly turned to face his wife. With a voice like ice, he announced that the bank had flagged and rejected the final venue payment that very morning. He also revealed that every single prior deposit had been illegally drained from the personal checking account of Thomas Miller, my father. Right on cue, the wedding planner stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen and confirmed that the hotel's billing ledger perfectly matched Evan's statement. Backed into a corner with 0 exits, Brooke finally snapped. She screamed that the money was going to be hers eventually anyway. Completely unhinged, she shrieked that the inheritance was rightfully hers. And I was just trying to waste it all on useless nursing homes and pointless therapies. Dozens of guests were recording the entire meltdown. My mother sprinted across the room, grabbing Brooke's arm to try and shut her up. But the damage was irreversible. The truth was captured from 20 different angles. Evan dropped the cloth napkin he had been holding onto a nearby table. He looked at the woman he had married just hours ago with a look of utter disgust. Then he turned to the crowd and announced that the reception was officially canceled. He turned his back on everyone and walked out the grand front doors without looking back. Seconds later, the venue manager approached Brooke. With cold professionalism, he reminded her that the massive, outstanding balance for the ballroom was still due immediately. Brooke spun toward me, her eyes wild with desperation. "Pay the hotel! Save the family from this humiliation!" she screamed. With the help of a server, I managed to stand up. I looked her dead in the eye and replied calmly, "My dad's healthcare is not a slush fund for your wedding." 2 security guards flanked her immediately. They escorted the screaming bride out through a side exit while she continued to shriek my name. The emergency room waiting area smelled of industrial sanitizer and old magazines. A triage nurse had just picked the glass shards out of my palm and wrapped it in clean white gauze. My phone vibrated against the plastic armrest. It was a text from Sarah Jenkins. She was blunt. The bank investigators had just uncovered an external offshore account in Brooke's name. The wedding was only the tip of the iceberg. 3 days later, my hip was still covered in deep purple and yellow bruises. Walking around my small apartment was a slow, painful process. The heavy bandage on my hand made it hard to even hold a coffee mug. While still at the ER, I had filed formal assault charges with the police. I refused to minimize the physical violence Brooke had inflicted on me. The lead detective confirmed that the Grand Oak Hotel had fully cooperated from minute one, handing over all the high-definition security footage before the ballroom was even cleaned up. The official interrogations kicked off the following Tuesday. I sat across from an Adult Protective Services caseworker in a quiet, sterile room. I handed over thick folders containing perfectly organized copies of every bank statement and invoice, heavily tabbed with sticky notes. The original documents remained locked in a fireproof safe at Sarah's law firm. My father had his own interview, accompanied by Maya, his speech therapist. He used his tablet to articulate exactly what he wanted to say, without anyone speaking for him. By the end of that first week, a court-appointed financial fiduciary took total control of all funds related to his care. Brooke was entirely locked out of the estate. The full scope of the devastation was revealed 2 weeks later. On a rainy afternoon, Sarah Jenkins called me into her office and spread the preliminary forensic audit across her oak desk. The numbers were staggering. Over the course of 18 months, roughly $110,000 had vanished. Only a fraction of it had gone to the wedding. Sarah pointed to a massive list of wire transfers sent to a shadow account under Brooke's name. She had used our father's retirement funds to pay off premium credit cards, fund luxury weekend getaways, and buy designer clothes. But the most chilling part was the memo lines. Brooke had intentionally altered the descriptions on dozens of wire transfers to make them look like medical reimbursements paid out to me. She had spent months carefully manufacturing a fake paper trail to frame me as the embezzler. It was an incredibly sophisticated scheme, and it had almost worked. The only thing that destroyed her narrative was the bank's digital security logs. Fraud investigators pulled the IP addresses and device IDs for every single transaction. The data unequivocally proved that the fraudulent wires had originated exclusively from my sister's personal laptop. Furthermore, the timestamps of the thefts perfectly matched the hours I was clocked in at the hospital, working on the rehab floor. Even after the catastrophic fallout at the wedding, Brooke had not stopped trying. The security logs showed that on the very night her reception imploded, she tried 3 times to log into the frozen accounts from her cell phone. She was desperately trying to change the routing numbers so the hotel could pull the outstanding balance. She even tried to use the exact same 2-factor authentication code she had tricked my father into handing over, under the guise of paying for his wheelchair ramp. The system permanently locked her out. Cut off from the cash, Brooke resorted to her final weapon. She posted a massive, tear-filled manifesto on social media, claiming a jealous, bitter sister had brainwashed an elderly stroke victim to destroy a beautiful marriage. I did not reply. I did not report the post. I did not defend myself against her lies. I let the internet do the talking for me. Furious about the disaster at the wedding, several guests uploaded their raw, unedited videos to the internet. The footage clearly showed Brooke yanking the chair out from under me, lunging to silence my father's communication tablet, and screaming that the inheritance would eventually be hers anyway. The videos went incredibly viral across the Chicago area. The final nail in the coffin came from one of her own bridesmaids. Disgusted by the lies, the bridesmaid leaked a series of private text messages Brooke had sent months before the wedding. In the texts, Brooke bragged that the second the vows were exchanged, she was going to permanently lock me out of the family home and cut off my access to our father. The morning after the texts leaked, my mother showed up at my apartment building. I met her down in the lobby, her trench coat soaking wet from the rain. I spoke to her right there by the mailboxes. I refused to invite her upstairs. She grabbed my good wrist. Shaking, she begged me to call the authorities and tell them the missing money was just a misunderstood family gift. She kept insisting we could still fix this privately, in-house. I took a deliberate step backward, forcing her to let go. Then I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my chest. Did you know Brooke was taking his money? My mother dropped her gaze to the floor. In a barely audible whisper, she confessed that she knew about some of it. She assumed Brooke would eventually pay it back, and she justified it in her head as a harmless early advance on the inheritance. I stared coldly at her. Dad is still alive. He needs specialized medical care every single day, and that money was his lifeline, not a wedding slush fund. A few days later, my father moved out of the suburban house for good. The court-appointed fiduciary arranged his transfer to a premium assisted living facility that provided 24-hour neurological care. I helped him arrange his favorite potted plants by the large bay window and mounted a secure charging stand for his tablet on his nightstand. I never touched his bank accounts, and I never made legal decisions on his behalf. My mother was legally permitted to visit him, but her medical and financial proxy rights had been completely stripped away by the court. The quiet rhythm of my new life was interrupted when my phone vibrated loudly against the kitchen counter. It was a detective from the police department. Using a very grave tone, he informed me that the district attorney had reviewed the forensic audit, the bank IP logs, and the viral wedding videos. The DA was officially pressing charges. My sister was being indicted for felony embezzlement, elder financial abuse, and physical assault. This was no longer a messy family drama. She was going to face the criminal justice system. The harsh winter dragged on, giving way to a damp, freezing spring. Slowly, the dominoes began to fall. Evan finalized his divorce before the trees outside the courthouse even bloomed. One day, a thick manila envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside were printed copies of every email Evan had exchanged with the hotel's billing department. Pinned to the front was a yellow sticky note with a handwritten apology. He admitted he had willfully ignored massive red flags because he was obsessed with having the perfect country club wedding. I threw the apology note in the garbage. I handed the printed emails directly over to the district attorney. Evan and I never spoke again. For the first few months, Brooke aggressively maintained her innocence. She swore to her expensive defense attorney that she would take it to trial and prove I had masterminded the whole thing. But all that bravado evaporated the morning the prosecutor dropped a massive banker's box onto the conference table. Inside was the flawless forensic audit, the IP logs proving the theft happened on her laptop, and the sworn, notarized statement from our father. Faced with an avalanche of hard evidence, her own lawyer advised her to take a plea deal. The financial ruin hit her instantly. As part of the plea agreement, the judge ordered full restitution. Brooke was forced to liquidate her luxury SUV and drain whatever savings she had left. She also had to surrender every cent the hotel had partially refunded after the catastrophic cancellation. Furthermore, she was permanently barred from ever holding fiduciary duty or managing another human being's finances. If she missed a single restitution payment by 1 penny, it would be an automatic violation of her parole. On the day of the sentencing, the courthouse hallways smelled of industrial floor wax and damp wool coats. Before we walked through the double doors of the courtroom, Brooke cornered me. She was wearing a cheap gray pantsuit, stripped of all the designer jewelry she used to flaunt. Her voice trembling, she begged me to tell the judge that my father had always wanted to give her that money. She grabbed the lapel of my blazer. Fighting back tears, she asked, "Are you really going to stand by and let your own sister go to state prison?" I brushed her hand away with cold precision. "You had 6 weeks to return the money from the day I sent that first email. You also had dozens of chances to tell the truth before you yanked a chair out from under me in front of 200 people. We walked into the courtroom. It was a cavernous room with dark mahogany benches and harsh fluorescent lighting. My father was parked in his wheelchair in the very first row. Maya sat right next to him, adjusting the volume settings on his tablet. When the judge called for the victim impact statement, I walked up to the podium. I had not written a speech. I simply held a single sheet of paper containing the exact words my father had drafted during his therapy sessions. The statement barely mentioned the stolen cash. Instead, it focused entirely on the profound humiliation of being treated like an inanimate object, incapable of thought or autonomy. As I read his words into the microphone, the courtroom was deathly quiet. The statement detailed exactly how his youngest daughter had stolen his voice to bankroll her own greed. When I finished, I stepped back from the mic. My father raised his left hand, tapped a button on his screen, and the electronic voice echoed through the silent courtroom. Rachel told the truth. The judge did not deliver a dramatic monologue, nor did he offer an ounce of sympathy. He accepted the DA's plea deal and read the sentence into the record. Brooke was sentenced to 3 years in the state penitentiary, serving 18 months behind bars with the remainder on heavily monitored probation, and full financial restitution was mandatory. Bailiffs closed in and escorted a sobbing Brooke toward the holding cells. I did not feel a rush of joy, and I certainly did not smile. I just felt the heavy relief of a judge and my own father publicly validating the truth. As I walked down the courthouse steps, my mother blocked my path. She was clutching her leather purse tightly to her chest. The very first thing she did was demand I give her money to help pay off Brooke's massive legal bills. I shook my head. Her face hardened instantly. She snapped that the family needed to heal, and she demanded I write a character reference letter to the parole board pleading for leniency for my sister. I stopped on the steps and stared her down. Forgiveness does not mean erasing the consequences of a felony, and it absolutely does not mean I am obligated to finance a disaster I tried to prevent. I walked past her and drove back to my quiet neighborhood. I walked into my building, unlocked the door, and dropped my keys on the entryway table. Then I checked my phone. I had 12 missed calls, all from my mother. Below them was a single text message. "Come home. We need to decide how to fix this family." I stared at the glowing screen. A year ago, that message would have triggered a panic attack. I would have grabbed my car keys and raced to the suburbs to play the dutiful crisis manager. But today was different. I placed the phone face down on the table. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of ice water, and drank it slowly. Then I picked the phone back up. I didn't call her. I just sent a brief reply. I told her that if she wanted to talk, I was available on Tuesday afternoon at a neutral coffee shop in the city. I added one non-negotiable condition. If the conversation involved money in any capacity, my attorney, Sarah Jenkins, would be sitting at the table with us. We met at a busy cafe that smelled intensely of roasted espresso and burnt sugar. My mother was already waiting in a back booth. She wore an immaculate silk blouse, but she could not hide the deep exhaustion lines around her eyes. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask if my injured hand was fully healed. She pulled a yellow legal pad out of her purse and slid it across the table. She had drafted a master plan to rebuild the family. First, she wanted me to move back into the suburban house to manage the property maintenance. Next, she wanted me to take out a personal loan to help cover the mounting debt. Finally, she proposed pulling my father out of his specialized care facility and bringing him back to the house so we could stop paying for his premium medical care. She folded her hands and looked at me expectantly. "You are the strong one, Rachel. It is your responsibility to put this family back together." I did not raise my voice. I didn't even touch the yellow notepad. I just looked at the woman who, months earlier, had stood by while the locks to my own childhood home were changed to keep me out. I reminded her that my father now had a court-appointed fiduciary, an ironclad medical care plan, and the absolute legal right to choose where he lived. I told her I would continue to visit him, champion his rehabilitation, and be a good daughter to him, but I would never, ever, go back to being her unpaid nurse, her emergency ATM, or her human shield against the consequences of her own actions. I slid the legal pad right back across the table. I spent years making sure this family never had to face reality. I am done doing that. My mother sat there in stunned silence. For the first time in my life, she looked genuinely shocked. I stood up, left her in the booth, and walked out into the warm spring afternoon. Today, as I sit in my hospital office in July 2026, that conversation feels like it happened in another lifetime. On my desk sits a brushed bronze nameplate. Director of Operations, Rehabilitation Services. 2 weeks after Brooke's sentencing, I officially accepted the promotion. I finally reclaimed the career I had put on ice to manage my father's medical crisis. That professional stability gave me the foundation to launch CareBridge Consulting. Last month, I signed my very first client. I helped a family navigate the legal nightmare of setting up a secure medical trust for a relative suffering from severe aphasia. I use every brutal lesson I learned fighting the healthcare system to help other families establish ironclad boundaries and bulletproof paper trails. I never use my father's trauma as a marketing pitch, but his quiet resilience is the foundation of every piece of advice I give. His new life is peaceful. His suite at the facility has massive windows overlooking a courtyard, filled with potted plants we picked out at the nursery together. His communication tablet is always fully charged and resting securely by his left hand. Last Sunday, the dining room manager came in with the weekly menu. My father did not need anyone to speak for him. He tapped his screen, selected the herb-roasted chicken over the vegetarian pasta, and requested an earlier dinner time. They seem like incredibly minor details, but to him, they represent total ownership over his own life. My mother still visits him on Tuesdays. She brings him glossy magazines and complains about the neighborhood gossip, but she has zero legal authority to sign a single piece of paper on his behalf. The ultimate proof of my own independence happened on a Friday night. I unlocked my apartment door with the exact same blue key that gave me comfort during the darkest days of the audit. Inside, Aunt Nancy and my father were waiting. She was pouring sparkling water into 3 glasses. He was parked at the head of the dining table, the exact same table I had assembled with an Allen wrench months ago. There were no massive floral arrangements and no crystal chandeliers. The apartment just smelled of roasted garlic and fresh vegetables. I sat down next to him. My father looked around the small room, then reached for his tablet. The electronic voice was crystal clear. "This is my family." Aunt Nancy raised her glass, her eyes glistening with tears. I gently clinked my glass against my father's. No one was screaming. No one was secretly funneling money through shadow accounts. And no one was demanding I torch my own future to protect a lie. After dinner, once the dishes were washed, I walked into my bedroom and pulled the massive evidence binder out of my desk drawer. The hospital bills, the bank IP logs, and the legal transcripts had served their purpose. I placed the heavy binder on the highest shelf in my closet and shut the door. I had finally put down the physical weight of that betrayal. As I walked back into the living room, my new business phone started to ring. It was an unknown number. I answered with my standard professional greeting. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice trembled with fear and exhaustion. She apologized for calling so late. She told me her father had just suffered a massive stroke and lost his ability to speak. Her voice breaking, she explained that her older brother had just accused her of stealing money from their father's medical fund. The rest of the family was already pressuring her to pay it back just to avoid a scandal. I did not promise her magic fixes. I did not offer hollow, toxic positivity platitudes. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad, and grabbed a black pen. "Take a deep breath," I told her. "Now, tell me exactly what documents you have, and let's track the paper trail. Because sometimes, being the strong one in a family is a dangerous trap. You are conditioned to believe that love means suffering in silence, absorbing massive financial hits, and tolerating toxic behavior just to keep the peace. But real love does not demand that you act as a meat shield for someone else's greed. This nightmare taught me a vital lesson. Setting hard boundaries is not an act of betrayal. When you suspect someone is financially abusing a vulnerable relative, your greatest weapon is not a screaming match at a holiday dinner. Your greatest weapons are meticulously organized bank records, aggressive legal boundaries, and an absolute refusal to accept a lie as the truth. You have every right to walk away from a family table if the cost of admission is your sanity, your financial security, and your future. Have you ever had to enforce a brutal boundary with a relative to protect yourself or someone you love? Share it in the comments. Your story might be the exact wake-up call someone else needs to read before they bankrupt themselves paying for someone else's sins. Months after the trial ended, there were still nights when I would jolt awake in the dark, my mind flashing back to that crowded ballroom. I would hear the screech of the wooden chair scraping against the marble. I would feel the suffocating silence of 200 people watching me hit the floor. I would see the arrogant smirk on my sister's face, utterly convinced she was untouchable. For a very long time, I believed that moment was the most humiliating trauma of my life. But time gave me a different perspective. I did not lose my place in the family that day. That day, I finally realized I should never have to fight for a seat at a table where I inherently belonged. Because family is not defined by a shared last name, expensive matching outfits in a photo shoot, or VIP seating at a luxury country club. Family is proved when someone gets horribly sick, and their dignity still matters. Family is when a person loses their physical voice, and someone fights relentlessly to make sure they are still heard. Family is when the money runs dry, and the respect remains completely intact. My father spent a year believing his silence was a burden to the people around him. After his stroke, everyone rushed in to speak for him. They decided what he wanted. They decided what he needed. They decided what was best for his estate. But no one actually stopped to ask him. That was the most devastating injury he suffered. It was not the stolen retirement funds or the hijacked bank accounts. It was the crushing realization that his own family believed his voice had zero value. And when he finally got that voice back, even if it came through a digital screen and a robotic speaker, it changed the trajectory of all our lives. Because my father never needed me to go to war for him. He never needed me to play the martyr or the savior. He just needed someone to hand him the tools to advocate for himself. That was the ultimate victory. The victory was not watching Brooke get hauled off to state prison. It was not hearing the judge read a guilty verdict. It was not watching a carefully curated social media lie burn to the ground in front of 200 wedding guests. The true victory was watching my father tap a screen to choose his own dinner. It was watching him dictate his own physical therapy schedule. It was watching him choose his own apartment. Small, seemingly insignificant choices that able-bodied people take for granted every single day. But for a man whom others had tried to erase, those tiny choices were the definition of absolute freedom. My relationship with my mother never recovered. Not because I harbor a burning hatred for her. Hate requires too much energy and far too much time. I simply stopped carrying the emotional baggage she refused to unpack. For decades, I confused love with endless sacrifice. I thought being a devoted daughter meant absorbing every blow, fixing every crisis, and offering forgiveness before anyone even bothered to apologize. But I learned the hard way that unconditional love does not mean unconditional access. Sometimes, endlessly fixing things is just a slow, painful way of erasing yourself. I still see my father all the time. We have our comfortable routines. Sometimes we watch classic movies. Sometimes we listen to jazz. Sometimes we just sit by the window and watch the Chicago weather change without saying a single word. And even though he cannot speak the way he used to, our conversations never feel incomplete. Because I finally learned how to truly listen. The great irony of this entire nightmare is that my sister tried to publicly revoke my seat at the family table, but in doing so, she forced me to build my own. I built a table where no one has to beg for basic human decency. A table where no one has to pretend a toxic situation is normal. A table where love is not a transaction funded by guilt. The old family table was built on a foundation of appearances and lies. My new table is small. It is simple. It has scratches from an Allen wrench, and it doesn't match any luxury aesthetic, but it is authentic. And for the first time in my adult life, every single person sitting around it actually wants to be there. I learned that enforcing boundaries does not destroy a family. Sometimes, it is the only surgical strike that can save whatever genuine love is left. I learned that saying no does not mean you lack empathy. Sometimes, saying no is the most brutal, honest form of love you can offer. Because allowing a toxic person to destroy your peace just to maintain a fake illusion of harmony doesn't save anyone. It just allows the infection to spread. If I can leave you with one concrete takeaway from this chaos, it is this. Never ignore the red flags when a vulnerable person's assets are being drained. Never hesitate to hire ruthless legal professionals. Never convince yourself that staying quiet keeps the peace, because a peace treaty signed with lies is just a ceasefire before a massacre. And if you ever find yourself sitting at a table where people actively make you feel small, remember this. Your worth is not dictated by the chair someone else allows you to sit in. Your value is not determined by the approval of people who profit off your silence. And never let anyone gaslight you into believing that saving yourself is an act of abandonment. Sometimes, standing up and walking away from a broken table is the absolute best thing you can do, because it is the first step toward building a brand new life. A life where you can finally sit down, breathe easy, and know without a shadow of a doubt that your seat was earned, and it is yours to keep.